Hey everyone, today I'm going to share some thoughts about the Weapon Masteries, which I've kind of been itching to get out into the world and hear what you guys think about it, because I have some thoughts about it. I have some praise, some critique, and some things I think honestly a bit silly. And in case you're new here, hi, my name is Lucas, and on this channel I talk a lot about D&D. I like to kind of think about and discuss kind of game design and homebrewing stuff for the game, as well as teaching about the game and talking about the more narrative aspects. I like this game a lot. So in case you didn't know, in the new edition of D&D, they added something called mastery properties to basically every single weapon in the game. There are 8 different mastery properties in the game, and each weapon kind of has one to kind of match what type of weapon it is. Initially, when I first heard that they were going to be in the game or in the new edition, I heard the mastery properties would be something like topple and raise and cleave, and my mind instantly went to Baldur's Gate 3, because in that game, which is based on the D&D 5th edition mechanics, one of the things they added in that game was gave these weapons like a new move they could do, which for a quarterstaff, for example, was called topple, or cleave for the great axe and stuff like that. So initially I was pretty excited about this, them adding some new variety to especially martial classes, you know, that use these weapons a lot. And that's kind of a common critique with this game, that when you're playing a martial, you often just do basic attacks. I attack with the longsword, and there isn't really a lot of choice there, or a lot of interesting decisions to be made or cool effects. So this felt like they were trying to do something about that, and I think they also have in some aspects. But where my disappointment kind of started to kick in was when I realized that the mastery properties in the 5.5 edition, they aren't like limited use abilities or kind of a special attack for the weapon. They act more like a standard effect, that when you hit with your basic attack, it just has this additional effect. For example, there is one called Vex, where it says if you hit a creature with this weapon and deal damage to the creature, you have advantage on your next attack roll against that creature. There's also kind of a similar one called Sap. So if you hit a creature with a weapon that has the Sap property, which I believe is the mace, for example, that creature has disadvantage on their next attack roll. So these effects, while I think they're pretty useful and they are cool, obviously they are more powerful than a standard attack. The thing I'm kind of bummed about is that it feels like they're trying to add some variety or add some uniqueness to these weapons, but instead I feel like they've just kind of added additional effects when I do a basic attack. So when I hit with a short sword or a mace, I just give them the opponent disadvantage on an attack, or I get advantage on my next attack. I mean, it's useful, but I don't really know. It doesn't really feel... I'm still just doing a basic attack. That being said, there are also other options like topple, for example. Quarterstaff is a weapon that has the topple property, which basically, when you hit a creature, you can force them to make a constitution saving throw, and if they fail that, they fall prone, which... that's a really powerful ability as well. You have the Battle Master, for example, that has the tripping attack, which has to use like the superiority die. So they have to use a resource to make this kind of toppling move, which I think that's closer to the direction we're kind of going for, or I was hoping for. But there's still the issue where there's no limit to how many times you can topple someone with a quarterstaff. And you can think about that. Why is that a problem? Well, I think it is because it's kind of just a side effect that's tacked on to the normal attack, and you gotta imagine players are gonna use the abilities or moves that are most advantageous to them. So even though this topple feature on a quarterstaff is kind of an optional thing you can do, you don't have to topple an opponent. But let's be real, if you're fighting someone, why wouldn't you want to knock them prone? Like, you're still doing your weapon damage, it's still your attack. It's just an additional effect. So I don't see a scenario where you wouldn't want to use these features. I don't see a scenario when you're gonna hit with a quarterstaff and you wouldn't want to knock someone prone, or you hit someone with a short sword and you wouldn't want advantage on your next attack. If every attack is a special move, no attack is a special move. And that's kind of my main critique about this, is that I feel like there's an opportunity to do something unique, to add this kind of variety and make each weapon feel different from each other, which I feel like is what it's trying to do. But also there's also an opportunity to give martial classes, give them some variety or something different they can do other than an attack. What I keep kind of thinking back to or using it as an example is Baldur's Gate 3, actually. The game it kind of feels like it's inspired from. In that game, you have separate moves, like the topple move is a separate attack for the quarterstaff, where you can potentially knock someone prone, but there's the drawback of it dealing less damage, and you also have a limited use for it. But in that case, it feels like you're making a legitimate decision about whether you're trying to topple someone off their feet, or you want to deal the most amount of damage. Something else I want to comment on as well with the current mastery properties is that some of them are just outright silly, I think. For example, the Grace, a mastery property, that's the one that you get for the Great Sword. Basically, what Grace does is that if your attack roll misses a target, the target still takes damage equal to your strength modifier, essentially. So, like, mechanics wise, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good feature, that every miss deals at least some damage. And I think it's statistically, if you'll probably get a pretty good damage buff. But what I'm confused about is what are they doing? Like, what does that fight look like, where the guy with like a great sword swinging it around and every attack that's technically a miss is still dealing damage? What's happening? Are they like constantly, grazing them, just cutting off a part of like their hair or something like that? I don't know. I just think that's dumb. Mechanics wise, it's good, but it creates problems just kind of trying to describe what's going on. And just like with all the other mastery properties, why wouldn't I want to do some extra damage on every single miss? So let's just pretend that every time I miss with a great sword, I do strength modifier damage, and it just kind of happens, and no one has an idea of how that happens, but the mechanic says so. You also have something like the push mastery property, which when you hit a creature, you can push them up to 10 feet, and you can do this with larger creatures too. So you can have like a dwarf with a small hammer or something like that hit like a horse, and it flies 10 feet into the air. That's on more of the light-hearted, fun, silly, I guess, because it is a fantasy universe. So I'm a little less critical of that, but Grace, not so much. Overall, I think it's a really neat idea. I like that they are trying to add something to the weapons and make each weapon feel a bit more unique and add these additional effects and stuff. I just would have wished they've done it in a different way and not just tacked it on like some kind of magical property that grants you advantage, or that just happens every time I hit something. That's just the new standard. Like I said, if every move is a special move, no move is a special move. So you kind of you still have the problem of the kind of sameness. And yeah, instead, what I wish they had done with this, and what I would have done if I was designing this, was I would basically make maybe 7 or 8 different mastery properties, kind of like they did here, but have each of them be basically an additional special move or an ability that this weapon can do. Like, for example, the daggers or spears or something that kind of stabs people, that could have like a bleed attack or bleed move. The great axe and the great sword, for example, they could have the cleave move, like a special attack that's really good at just hitting multiple enemies in one swing. You can have concussive, like a concussive blow that confuses the target or something like that. You can have that for the hammers and the maces and these kind of big bludgeoning weapons. I would have them being a separate move that you could use a number of times, maybe equal to your proficiency bonus or something like that. So there is some kind of limit to it, and you could in that case also make them more powerful or more unique. That's personally what I would have done, and I wish they'd do, because at that point you're giving someone an interesting decision. Are they going to attack normally, or they're gonna use this special bleed move or make a concussive blow? And then obviously make sure they all are grounded in some kind of reality. Like, you can imagine someone hitting a hammer on someone's head or something, and they are gonna get concussed by that. It's grounded in reality. We can all kind of narrate it and add flavor to it, describe it, unlike Grace. Anyways, those are kind of my thoughts about it. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about this, what I've talked about. I've honestly not heard a lot of people critiquing this or having a lot of issues with the mastery properties. Most people seem to be pretty happy with this edition and think they are cool. So maybe it's only me who has a problem with it. Yeah, let me know in the comments what you think about this. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day or night. And as always, may the dice roll in your favor.